Welcome to the Human Side of Engineering and Product Development podcast, brought to you by Saratech.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our podcast. I'm very excited to have Peng Cau with me today. Peng is the director for startup programs at Siemens Digital Industry Software. She has over 30 years of experience. She's a very accomplished woman. She's an angel investor. She's on the board directors of multiple companies. You know, if you want to know anything about startup, Peng is a person to talk to. So very excited to have you on today. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, Andy. Thank you for the kind words and for the invitation to join.
No problem. So we first met at the Siemens Partner Conference in November of last year. And as soon as I saw you speak, and love your energy, your positive vibe, your enthusiasm. So I had to get you on our podcast, right? I'm like, I need to talk to this woman and learn more about her and get to know her a little bit. So hopefully on this pod, our viewers will get to know you a little bit as well. So
Thank you.
what makes you so passionate about startup?
I think the energy when you meet a founder, I was a founder myself for 25 years and I was CEO for 22. And I think in general, when you do hard things, and hard tech is a very difficult sector to be in when you are designing and building something. There's a lot of challenges. I call it the three-headed ugly dragons, right? Where it takes a lot of capital to build the first prototype. It takes a lot of money. And then most investors don't want to invest. And then you have to find that early adopters, and most companies don't want to work with startup. So when you look at the challenges, you wonder why anybody wants to do it. So when you found founders who are in the hard tech sectors, there's just a different breed, and the commitment and the belief in what they're trying to do. And when they are successful, they're the one that are going to shape how we live, how we work, how we, it's going to shape our future. And I just get very excited by the technologies that are coming out of these founders. I find the founders themselves very fascinating because, again, as I said earlier, it's not an easy things to do. And when someone's willing to do it, you have to always wonder, what does it take for someone to want to keep fighting those hard battles when there are easier way to make a living? So what are they doing?
Yeah,
And that's part of the reason I'm so passionate about like the
yeah,
startup
for
world,
sure,
the hard tech founders, and maybe because
for
I've done it,
sure.
so I know I walked their path. So when I said I can relate, I truly mean I can relate. So I
Yeah,
bootstrapped
yeah,
my own company, right? So it's you kind of go, yeah, I know how hard it takes, and wow, why are you doing it? So that's why I'm
yeah.
so passionate.
Well, I mean, I love your passion, and anyone who met you for 5 minutes can totally see it and feel it. Now, you and I, we have a quite similar background, right? So we're about
Okay.
in the same age group, and you and I are both immigrant. So I found out that you actually you immigrated to Canada in 1980. So did I. That's when my mom and I came to the U.S. in 1980.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a connection there, right? And then
Absolutely.
also the other thing that I found out is your mother was a very big influence in your life, and so's my mom. So like we have that in common, right? So just from
You're gonna
listening
love what's wrong with me,
to
Sandy.
yeah, I mean, so that's why I felt that connection right away. And
Absolutely.
so you have said that one of the things that your mom taught you is to really learn how to take care of people, and that's a very, very important thing to you. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, relationship at the foundation of every successful relationship, whether it's with your employees, with your spouse, with your children, with friends, with vendors, VC, it really doesn't matter. I think at the core of every relationship is respect. And my mother, although had a great one education, was the wisest person I've ever met in my life. And growing up, she talked a lot about her experience in Cambodia prior to the Civil War, where my dad had started his own manufacturing company, and she actually was the one that managed all the employees. And we're not just talking about, um, employees in the factory, but also employees within the household. We had nanny for each of the children, we have maids, we had servants, we had chauffeur. My mom was the one who managed them, all of that. And I would say that many of my HR practices that I adopt over the years was my mother's influence. And so I'll give you an example. One, she always said, and this is not from a textbook, this is from her lived experience, where she said, always discipline in private because everyone has pride. And so you don't want to do in public, and always compliment in public, right? So now you see it all over social media and all these
Yeah.
subject matter experts that are talking about that. But my mother was doing that like 5 years ago, right? And it's not a hard concept. At the end of the day, if you put yourself in somebody's shoes, right, the easiest thing you can give someone is respect. Respect who they are, respect the position they're in, just a general respect people. The other thing she taught us was it doesn't matter who you meet, like there's always something you can learn from them, whether it's a janitor or the CEO or whatever. And so, that's the other thing about human aspect is if you look at every person, not their title, but what can you learn from them and take that opportunity to learn from them, that again gave them a certain amount of pride. And you're not just looking at people's title, you're looking at them as a individual that you want to show respect to. And so those were really core lessons from the get-go that my mom drilled into us.
No,
So I
yeah,
always said that all my HR
absolutely.
practice is from her.
Absolutely. That's a great lesson to learn early in life, right? I mean,
Yeah.
very important nowadays. And that's part of the the name of this podcast, right? The human side of engineering. There's a huge human element to all of us, and we need to learn and respect each other, and really, get to know the other person, right?
Yeah. And I want to add, Andy, that, the true test of her philosophy is that during the Civil War, the killing fields of Khmer Rouge, the working village that we were forced into, the second in command of that village was actually a former employees. So if you know anything about that time frame where 1/3 of the Cambodian populations were slaughtered,
Yeah,
worked or starved to death, we were saved, and only because that second command was a former employee. And so when we first went into that village, the first reaction my parents had was like, "Oh my gosh, we are now going to be killed," because the Khmer Rouge targeted the educated, all the business owners. So
yeah,
we would have been a target. And so my parents automatically, that was where they went, okay, this is the end of our family line. Like we're all going to be killed. And he, in secret, basically told my parents that because of how my parents had treated our employees at a time in a country where there's no labor law, he was not going to betray us. In 2014, I went back to Cambodia, and my cousins and I, with my dad and sister, traveled the path of that horrific nightmare of living in
yeah,
these work camps. And he brought up a story that his dad had told him that someone in the rice field had recognized my dad and point to another person and said, "That's my former boss." And so the guy said, "Why don't you report him to the soldier and the military?" Right? Because at that time,
yeah,
everybody's betraying everybody else. And he's like, "Not that family. That family was very kind to us." So I joke, but it's the truth, right? If my mom's philosophy of how the human side of things and how you treat people was successful in a world of chaos
yeah,
where, people are taught to betray each other, and we were not betrayed by two people, I'd say her philosophy's working.
yeah. It's
There's no
and
true test in that.
that's an amazing story, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it teaches us so much. Now, I also found some differences between us. I mean, obviously, there are obvious differences, but you are one of 11 children. So you have a huge family, right? And I'm the only child. So, yes, I was spoiled a little bit. So,
Yeah.
but out of your big family, you were the first to go to universities, right? You attended Queen's University?
No, I was the first to leave home for university, the
Oh,
first
okay.
girl. My parents were not educated in the sense that they didn't have opportunities, right? So they grew up doing, the 1930s and 1940s where
Yeah.
women were not allowed to work. And so their father, both situation, their father passed away when they were 3, and so their mother couldn't. They were extremely, extremely poor in China, and that's why like they left for a better life in Cambodia. And so they were not educated, not by choice. Um, Despite that lack of education, it was really important to my parents that their children have education. But I was the first girl allowed to leave home for university, and only because of the amount of scholarship I received. My mom in particular was an interesting woman. I used to call her a closet feminist because she had these very traditional view of what a good Chinese girl should and shouldn't do. So I was a bad Chinese girl. So I'm gonna throw that out there, right? Because I was driven, I talk back all the time, I'm opinionated. I had so I was everything that good Chinese girls shouldn't be. And in secret, I applied for university in Ontario because I had more money. And I didn't tell my mom because of her traditional view. I was told almost from day one that I was not allowed to leave home for school, right? And so the idea of sending her unmarried daughter outside of home was embarrassing for her. So it was like, nope, you're not leaving home for university. You're going to stay here, get your little degree, and get a nice job like a good Chinese girl. And so in secret, I applied to Queen's University and the scholarship kept coming in. And when she found out how much I got, she finally said, okay, you can go, but don't tell your grandma. Okay, so embarrassing. We cannot tell my grandma. So fine,
Right,
we won't
right.
tell grandma.
Right. But that's so typical of the Asian experience, right? Like you have to save
Yep.
face for the family. You can't do anything that
Yeah.
embarrasses the family. But then once like you hear, oh, how much money? Oh, it's all good now.
Money speak. Always money speak, Andy. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh yeah.
You can be less of a good Chinese girl now. There's money
Yeah.
involved.
Yeah. I'm Vietnamese, but we operate the same way, so
Real.
I can totally relate to your story. It's
I
like,
didn't know you're Vietnamese, so there's
yeah,
actually similarity. We're both from Southeast Asia, so yeah,
yes,
I'm
absolutely.
Cambodia with Chinese heritage.
Absolutely. Yeah. And at Queen's University, that's where you met your future husband and partners, where you started Transformic, right?
That is correct. Yeah, yeah. I met 2 partners at Queen's, and then a third one through a job.
Okay. Okay. So what gave you guys the idea to start the company? Like how did that startup company come about? Tell me a little bit about
Yeah.
that.
I always say that Transformix was an interesting startup in the sense that when you look at a lot of technology-based organization tend to start with a research or, a technology development. So my ex-partner, ex-husband, started the company based on the desire to build something for ourselves. And because we both work for companies in our early career that make us realize that's not the type of companies we want to work for. So me in particular, my first job was horrible. I worked for a software company in Toronto, and the way they treated their staff did not align with what my mom taught me, and that was
Oh yeah.
really hard for me. I
Yeah.
was only there for 9 months, and I always say it felt like 9 years of my life was taken from me. And when you have that sort of situation, when your moral what you're doing does not match with your moral upbringing, I think it destroy your soul. And so for me, I was looking for a way to get out because I didn't want that. And I think the best advice I got at that time was from a former professor. And she said, if you look at the top, the CEO, and you don't want to be that person, then you have to leave. So um, I left. I was only there for 9 months and I like, nope, I can't do that. So we moved back to Kingston, Ontario, where Queen's University is, because I was living in Toronto and my ex-husband was living in Ottawa. Kingston was a good midway point, and we really started a company where to create an environment where you can make a living, but you still get up in the morning and excited by what you're doing. We want an environment that was more about people, more about creating a culture that excites people, that it is about the technology and pushing out the technology. And so we just kept evolving over the 25 years that we were in business. We started out as an engineering firm. We eventually became an automation company. And then in 2012, we developed a disruptive technology that we took to the global market and sold 30 million plus in less than 6 years. And then our biggest competitor wanted to buy us out. So that was the journey.
That's impressive. And it's interesting how, when you think back about starting the company, it was all about people, right? It's going
Yes.
back to how you felt like the company you were at mistreated you, and you didn't want to be like that. You want to start something that's better and more aligned with what you are about as a person. So that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
I always joke that, and I use the word joke, but almost my joke based on some truth. My mom taught me what to do in terms of human relation.
Yeah.
My first company taught me what not to do, right? And in that lessons, I think that's equally as important. And reflecting back at the time was horrible. But looking back, to be blunt, I'm very grateful for it. And I'm very grateful that it happened when I was so young, fresh out of university, because it was also a company that was very cutthroat. The sales team were trained to steal accounts from each other,
Hmm.
and we were disciplined when we chose not to do that. So I had a deal. I had a verbal agreement with a couple of my colleagues. I said, "Look, I'm not going to steal your account if you just leave mine alone." And so we agreed to that. But every week we had to sit in front of our director and explain why we were going after someone's account. Really hated that because I am extremely competitive, but I don't like to compete against, within my own colleagues or within my
Yeah.
own company.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of things I can talk about with that company and how they treated staff. I was young. I had um, responsibilities, but I didn't have authorities. And there were a number of scenarios where, I couldn't give employee time off. In one situation, one of my project managers' teenage son unsuccessfully tried to commit suicide and he needed time off. And my former director wouldn't give him the time off unless he take it off without pay. And so, things like that really taught me when I build Transformix, that's not who I want to be, right? Like that's not the type of company that I want to build up. So,
Yeah.
after I sold the company or sold our intellectual property to ATS, I had a number of ATS employees that would say to me, your staff are very loyal to you. And I said, yeah, loyalty goes two ways, right? Like you can't just expect employees to be loyal to you and then mistreat them as if they're just a number. And so my first company, like I said, I'm very grateful that at 25, I learned what I wasn't willing to tolerate. And so when I start my company, I go, yeah, nope, don't want to do that. And I think those lessons are just as important as what you should do.
Absolutely. And at 25 to just, hey, I'm gonna go and start my own company. That's very brave. I don't remember what I was
Crazy.
thinking
I
at
call it crazy,
25.
Andy. I call it crazy. Some people call it brave. I call it crazy, Tomato,
Well,
tomato.
I don't you think all entrepreneur have a little bit of craziness in them? Like just like, hey, we're gonna do it whether you like it or not, you know?
Yep. 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 I used to say to my team, the other partners, I say, the image I always gave to them is like, okay, we have a plant and we're going to hold hand and we're going to jump off that cliff. We're not sure if that jump off is going to kill us or there's a river down below that we might be okay. But we're going to jump off anyway and see what happens. There's been a few times that almost kill us, but
Right,
we
right.
managed
Hey,
to keep
when you're
moving.
young and probably don't know any better, it's a great time to do
Yep.
it, right?
Yep.
So what were some of the biggest challenges that you remember when you first started that company? I mean, obviously
Um,
resources is always short, right? But what are some other things that you can think of?
yeah, I would say that. So, I'm like you said, we're about the same age, so you know this very well. When I first started the company, the startup world was all about .com, right? And 30 years ago, we did not have the same ecosystem that we have now to support startups. Entrepreneurship was not a lexicon that people talked about or really understood what it is. The banking system in Canada is very challenging compared to the US. Aside from the financial aspect of it, I think early on, my biggest challenge was um, being taken seriously. Because we're talking about 30 years ago, I decided to go into manufacturing. A lot of people that, you know, kind-hearted people who or think they're being kind-hearted, the advice was, why don't you just start something in .com? Why are you doing manufacturing? Because at that time, manufacturing was actually leaving North America, if you recall, right? So
Right. Right.
offshoring was very active at that time. And so why would a 25-year-old Asian woman who don't understand anything about manufacturing start a manufacturing company? That just seemed kind of insane. And so to be taken seriously was an issue for us. And so we had this contractor who at the time about my age now in his mid 50, and he had a lot of white hair, so all of my marketing material was his picture. Just to provide some smoke and mirror to get people to take us seriously. So that was the hardest part, is finding early customer that were willing to give a bunch of 25-year-old Yahoo a chance to develop the latest automation technology for them. And once you prove yourself, it gets easier, but and that's what hard tech founders tend to find, is that I always say, people want innovation until you tell them it's innovative, and they don't want it anymore, right? So
Right.
the idea has not changed in 30 years. Everybody's like, I want innovation. And you're like, well, this is new. Like, well, who else have used it? I don't want to be the
Right.
first
Right.
customer,
Right.
right? So when you're 25, 30 years ago, finding that early adopter was probably one of the biggest challenge we had to face.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. I want innovation, but has anyone done it before?
Yeah,
I don't want to be the
exactly.
I don't want to be the first one to do it.
Yeah, exactly right. Yep.
I hear you.
And
I hear you. And then you eventually sold your startup to ATS for 8 figures, right? So
yes,
it enables you to kind of move on and do what you do today, right? And obviously you had great success, right? But a lot of startups don't. And I think part of your success, because we talked about earlier, is your focus on people and treating people
right,
well, right?
right.
Is that where most startups fail, or are there other reasons you think why most startups fail?
A lot of startup fail in the technology space because two factors. I think the first one is that a lot of founders I found tend to come from a technical background. So
Mm,
they're very passionate about their technology and their research, and they have a difficult time translating that to a product, not just a product, but a product that is hitting a pain point that is pretty severe to the customer. So, I'll give you an example. Years ago, I was trying to help this startup, and they were developing some really interesting technology for the explosive industry. And I kept saying to them, what is the ROI? If you can't communicate the ROI to the customer, it's really difficult to sell that to the customers. And the founder's like, no, don't worry about ROI. Nobody cares about ROI in our market because they only care about the regulatory requirement. I'm like, that is an ROI, right? If
right.
they don't meet the regulatory requirement, there is a penalty. So calculate that to the ROI. So that's a simple example of, when you're too passionate about your technology and not about the problem you're trying to solve, you cannot communicate. So problem number one. Problem number two is that lack of communication, right? So I've met enough engineers like, who needs marketing? Marketing, whatever greatest thing I build, they're going to come. Like, no, that's not how it works. You can build the
It's not
greatest
Field of
mousetrap.
Dreams, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right? Like the field of dream, just because you build it. No one's going to come and play in your baseball field unless you tell them about it in a way that excites them. Like, right. So to me, those are, the commercialization strategy for disruptive technology is very different from commercialization strategy for existing product. Right. And they get confused between commercialization strategy and marketing strategy. Marketing strategy is one piece of a commercialization strategy. And so when I developed my product, I actually got all my executives to read Crossing the Chasm,
Mm-hmm.
and then we developed our
Great book.
commercialization strategy based on that. When I was the VP at ATS, and I had to bring the technology that they acquired from us into the market, I got a number of leadership to read Zone to Win, which is the second part of Crossing the Chasm that is written for a global company, and you're a small division within a global company. And how do you commercialize disruptive technology when you're under that bigger umbrella? And the strategies are very different. And so I think that's a big piece of puzzles that a lot of tech founders miss, and they're not willing to listen. They kind of brush it off. Um, I would say those are the big ones. But to your point, relationships is also really important. They've been saved at Transformix. Our company has been saved a few times because when we were truly in trouble, where we're on the verge of bankruptcy, we've had employees, instead of laying off 50% of the employees, the first time that happened, I went to my staff and I said, look, guys, the easy part is for me to lay off half of you. That's the easy part. The hard part is I need each of you to go back to your spouse and you figure it out with your spouse how much pay cut you can take. And so I've had employees that came back say, Peng, I could do 50%. I had an employee come back and he said, Peng, I'm a single dad. I can do $50. That's the extra I had after every paycheck. It's yours. And I'm like, love your $50, appreciate the spirit of things, but you keep that. The 50% I will take. And there was no guarantee that I was going to save the company with that pay cut. There was no guarantee that I was going to be able to pay them off. But because they did that, we were, we kept working with our customer. And again, loyalty is in every relationship. We went to our customers and we had customers that said, I know, Peng, you don't usually staircase, but this is a project I have. If you're interested, you can quote, and so we were doing things that we normally wouldn't do. We had our machinists and our millwright that were working overtime that were not, getting paid with a pay cut instead of getting paid overtime, and engineers that we couldn't get work for. This was doing like the 2018 market downturn, right? So everyone was
Right.
suffering. And so with all of that, we were able to turn the company around and I was able to pay them back. And because of my reputation, I was also able to negotiate with vendors to extend our term into 6 months instead of the typical 30 or 60 or 90 days. And so we paid everybody back the minute we were able to turn it around. And then in 2012, we went through another difficult time. At that time, when I said to the employees, this is what we need, it was easy. Like the ones that survived with us
Yeah.
and went through with us are like, hey, listen, Peng's going to pay us back when she can. Like her words, you can believe her, right? So that relationship, that loyalty is so critical when you need that kind of support and that kind of rallying around that organization to make it survive. And to me, the human side of a startup is sometimes more critical than everything else.
Oh, completely agree. Completely agree. I mean, that's how your company thrive in difficult times, right? Where everybody buys in, right? Everybody believe in your leadership, believe in what you're doing. So it's one of the key to a successful company is to have great leadership, right? So
Yeah.
what's your philosophy on great leadership?
I actually it was a Transformix philosophy that I adopt out of my own personal philosophy. And it's cheeky, maybe because I work with a bunch of engineers all my life. It's a formula. So I say success equal I square RP. The first I is integrity. So we just finished talking about trust. Whether it's with your customers, your suppliers, your employees, as I teach my kid, trust take a lifetime to build and 1 second to destroy, right? So integrity, do what you say what you do, regardless of anyone's looking or not. The second I is for innovation, and innovation with respect to always think outside the box. Don't be a me too, whether it's innovation with respect to building technology or innovation in how you do things, the process, or, innovation can be in many form, right? The unfortunate part is when we think of innovation, we always just talk about technology. To me, you can be innovative in many different ways in the way you treat people and how you build your business. There's multiple ways to do it. So I'm always challenging my staff to be like, all right, how are we going to be innovative about what we're doing? And when you start out at 25, like I did, and you don't have, 30 years of, I've always done it this way, it gave us a lot of freedom to try stuff. So that's the second I in that I square RP. The R is fundamental to like the first question you and I talked about is respect, right? Every relationship starts with respect. And everybody deserves your respect. So you start with that. I mean, you might get to the point where you realize someone doesn't respect your or deserve your respect. But I would say that at that point you should probably walk away from that relationship anyway.
Yeah.
And then the fourth one is passion. And like you said, Andy, you've noticed with me, I don't take on anything unless I'm really passionate about it. And I think that's so important because we spend so much of our time working, right? And our colleagues with, with people that, and so you should be passionate about what you do. You should be passionate about the organization that you're working for. You should be passionate with your colleagues that you're working with because you want to support them. And I'm a big believer that you can pay employees, but you can never pay employees enough to care. And when they care and they have that
Absolutely.
passion, they will go that extra miles to solve problems, to find creative ways to make your customer happy that you don't even know about, right?
Right.
Well, some of my favorite stories when I was the CEO of Transformix is when I hear that, one of my engineer was up till 3 a.m. to support another employee who is on site in Thailand, and I knew nothing about it, right?
Right.
They stay up to help each other, not because I asked them to, but because they didn't want to leave their colleague behind just because he was in Thailand. And those are the type of stories that makes me happy that I did something right. That if people are helping each other, doing stuff for each other, not because of my company or because of Pang, it's because we build a culture where people want to help each other and they
Yeah.
care about the outcome, that they celebrate it together. And our bonus structure was very much structure around our collective success than individual success. Now, don't get me wrong, we were also extremely demanding. And what I found is that employees who were high performance appreciate the fact that we were very demanding. So if you don't cut it, you're gone. Like
Yeah.
we were, we went through a lot of engineers for that reason because we had zero tolerance for incompetence. And then we had zero tolerance for people who did not meet that success equal I square philosophy.
Right.
And every employees we hired, the last interview was me, and that I was always looking for that. They go through the technical interview, they go through all of that. And then at the end, I make sure there is a philosophical fit because I can train you on how to use tools. I can train you on how to use NX, but I cannot train you to be passionate about what you're doing or the industry you're in. And if you don't fit our philosophy, there's no point in joining us.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that I strongly believe in. You can always train people how to do something, but
Correct.
it's their passion, their effort, their, I don't know, personality. It's their
Yes.
essence, their being. That's more
Yes.
important to me than anything else.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's that soft skill, right? And one of the questions I remember talking to a colleague about years ago, and he owns a number of restaurants locally here. And he said the first question he asked, and I love that, was when was the first time your parents gave you a job and that you actually did? And I thought that's such a great question because we have generations of kids who grew up with parents, maybe like you and I, who were immigrants or had a tough childhood, and think we're doing our kids a favor by doing everything for them. And we're not doing them a favor. We're doing them a injustice, right? By doing everything for them. So these kids come into a company and they act like somehow the company, they're owed something, right? Rather than have to work for it.
Absolutely. Um, Now you started your company 30 years ago. The resources available were different than today. So, for example, can you talk about the resources that are available today for tech startup? For example, what's Siemens doing to help companies with being a successful startup?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say in the last 15 years or so, there's been so much momentum globally and interest from the government level all the way to like enterprise like a Siemens to create ecosystem to support startups. Ecosystem, whether it's angel investment groups that is on a national level, or incubators and accelerators, and all these different programs in Canada, the US, and Europe, just all over, to basically encourage and support founders that wants to start a business, which I think is amazing. None of that existed when I first started out, right? Like fundamental, like how do I incorporate?
Yeah.
You got to figure it out yourself back 30 years ago. Now most economic development center have someone that can kind of help you, give you an early education on the, business 101. And then you start looking at what are corporations doing, like a Siemens. And the program that I'm leading is called Siemens for Startup in the digital industry software. And the reason I'm so passionate about this program, I love it so much, is that I wish Siemens had this 30 years ago when I had my company. And what that program does, it does two things. It enables startups to access our enterprise software, both tools for our engineering design and simulation and product lifecycle management software tools that a big global enterprise would be using. We gave it to our startup at a 95% discount.
Wow.
And that is really gave them, yeah, exactly. It's crazy. So that just gave them an opportunity to access that software, to be able to take the idea from their head into the computer, build a digital twin of their technology or their product, so that it makes it easier to talk to an angel investors or a bankers or, early adopters, right? Rather than just describe at a high level what that means, you can
Yeah.
actually show what the digital twin of this technology is going to be. So that make that conversation a lot easier. And if you have a very complex product that's gonna, like in my situation in 2012, where it cost 300,000 to build my first alpha, I didn't have the money.
Boy.
With a digital twin,
Yeah.
you can now show how this is gonna move, and then you can simulate if the simulation's important, right? Whether it's fluid dynamic or finite element analysis, whatever that may be. So we gave them some really powerful tools at a 95% discount to get them going. And then with Siemens, being the size of organization that we are, we really have tools that they can start from conceptualization all the way to automation. And so they will never hit a technology wall. And that was what I experienced when I first started out, is that when you are just starting out, you're desperate. You're always just looking for like the cheapest software you can have. So if someone tell you it's free, that sounds really exciting. The problem is that if your company takes off, a lot of that free becomes a problem for you, because now you're going to hit a technology stack wall, right?
Mm.
So if you're just designing with a couple of engineers, sure, one or two, fine. But when you start growing, expanding, and you have 10 engineers, 20 engineers, and now you have to worry about which ref went to which machine shop, and you have no way to control that, and you want to switch to a different product that have that, the wasted time, just as when you're scaling, I think people miscalculate how long and how painful that can take. I unfortunately had to go through it because I didn't have the Siemens for Startup 30 years ago. And so that is the first part of the program, is to enable them to do that. The second part of the program that I'm very passionate about, maybe because of my background, which is commercializing disruptive technology, developing strategy and tactical plans in my last two career, is that we provide, the first one's enable, the second one's empower. So we provide free, that's an important part, free co-marketing opportunities for the founders, so that they then have marketing assets that then they can use to promote their product in the market space. And when you're a founder, no one know who you are. That credibility is so critical. But if you're associated with a global organization like a Siemens, it gives you instant credibility that you may otherwise not have. So we spend, since I've taken over the role in the last 6 months, that has become a big push for me. So I host a podcast for Pioneers. It's a platform where hard tech founders get to tell their story. They're not talking about Siemens. They're not talking about anything else. They are telling their story. And we have now made that a video podcast so that the marketing asset is more valuable. We do case study videos. We invite them to a number of speaking engagement. In fact, right now I'm organizing a Hanover event. And for the first time, Siemens making room for me to bring a number of hard tech founders to join the delegation. And it's that access to the network that they may not have. And sometime all it takes is just that one yes to the right person that could move that needle for that startup between successful or not successful, becoming a unicorn or a bankruptcy, right? So we can't guarantee, we can only provide the platform in which gave them an opportunity to do something with it. And this is why I'm so passionate about the program that I'm leading right now.
Yeah, it's amazing. I can imagine if you had access to this program when you start, you probably started 10 companies instead of one.
Yeah.
Yeah, access
Well,
to this.
I still want a wound that I'm nursing, as I like to joke. I always joke that I still have like scar on my back that's bleeding that nobody can see. But yeah, I mean, when you're a startup, like every dollar count,
Yeah,
right? And if you're not spending that raise that you just had from your angel investor in buying software tool, and you can spend it hiring the next great technical engineers to speed up your design, how much faster can you scale your company, right? I can't answer that for you, but a founder should be able to answer that. And that's why even when we talk to angel investors and venture capitalists, is we said, what can your company do with that 95% saving in terms of their burn rate,
yep,
right?
yep. And
So
and the other part that you talk about is often overlooked, which is the marketing aspect. I mean, of course, being a
mhm.
marketer, I'm a little biased towards that,
Right,
but
right.
the marketing aspect is very important, and we talked about that earlier, right? Just because you
Yes,
build it doesn't mean people will come. People have to understand your technology, what you're all about, how it can help them, and getting that word out is very important in terms of getting your company to the next level. So I think that's a huge, huge benefit of the program that most people overlook.
absolutely. And we're trying to get that message out more and more to say, look, we have this program available. Take advantage of it, right? Tell us if you feel that going be a presenter at a conference going to help move that needle for you. Like at the end of the day, I think the message I try to get out to tech founder constantly is just because you build a baseball field doesn't they're going to come and play. You got to tell them about it in a way that they care, right? So
Right,
if we can give them a platform to do that, then it's a win for all of us.
right. So speaking of that, we you and I are going to be doing a webinar in about a month or so to actually get into a little bit more detail of what's available in the program and how startups out there can take advantage of it. So look for that information. We'll be publishing it soon. And then back to your podcast, it's called Pioneers Startups from Dreams to Reality, right? And that's the one
Correct.
that you
Yes.
host. Awesome,
Yes.
awesome. So I'm so sorry. I mean, originally I scheduled half hour, but I could talk to you for another 2 hours easily, right? So, but I know how valuable your time is. So I really want to thank you for being on today and loved our conversation. It's went exactly the way I thought it would. So looking forward to doing our webinar together in the near future. And I'm grateful to have met you and have a chance to talk to you like this. It's amazing. Thank you.
We'll keep having fun, Andy. That's what we're going to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Pang.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy.